Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me here. This is Kenny Long on the You Drive You Network. Tonight I want to talk about something that I don't usually do, and that's about other people. Came to my attention when I went to Matt's Mid-America Truck Show a couple of weeks ago. Walking around there, I saw a factoring company booth set up, and there was a gentleman out there with a whiteboard, going at it, breaking down different things, costs and factoring and how it all worked. And it was absolutely, completely, 100% wrong. Now, there are opinions, there are right ways, there are other ways, there's a million ways to skin a cat, and then there's just the flat-out wrong way. Now, of course, these companies pay a lot of money to be there, to rent that booth at the truck show, so I didn't jump in and try to cause a scene there at the show. I wanted to, I bit my tongue. But then I got home and I see this gentleman on YouTube breaking it down on his whiteboard, completely wrong. And I'm not talking about a little bit. This is by far the worst, absolute worst advice I have ever seen given on Facebook whatsoever. Wrong, wrong, wrong. It's not an opinion. It's not a miscalculation. It's just wrong, wrong. So I want to talk about that tonight, and the topic of the evening is, of course, factoring. Factoring the true cost and how to avoid the worst, the absolute, by far the worst advice ever. I don't usually do this, but tonight, absolutely, I cannot stand by and let this type of horrible advice get out there. I'm streaming live on YouTube only tonight. I am not taking any phone calls as I've done in shows in the past. If you're on Facebook or if you're on YouTube, I'm going to go through my little presentation here, and then I will get to some questions afterwards. If you have anything to add, any comments, go ahead and throw them in the comment section. I will get to all of that afterwards. Again, no phone calls whatsoever. I mean, I was fired up. I took a few minutes to put this little thing together here, and it's just so frustrating because it's such an easy concept to understand for most people. And it was so wrong. And he was in front of a big multi-million-dollar company, as all factoring companies are, giving absolute wrong, incorrect, horrible advice. Now, full disclosure first. I own a carrier and a brokerage. I do factor. A lot of people see me get up here and start talking about this and think that I am just an advocate for doing it all on your own. There are pros and cons to factoring, and at a certain point, sometimes it makes sense, and I did decide for my business it made sense. I am not going to tell you not to factor. That's not what this is about tonight. I'm going to explain to you the costs involved. I'm not even going to get into all of the pros and cons that I mentioned. I'm simply talking about the costs involved, primarily just with the overall rates that everybody talks about. I'm going to touch on a couple of the other little details as we go through this little presentation, but just the costs. Yes, there are services that you are buying from this factor. There are reasons why you might want to factor, but there are absolutely reasons why you should not factor. And if you don't understand what you're getting into, you may make that mistake. So, points that I want to address here tonight. I'm going to go through this here. The terminology that you use when you're explaining factoring is absolutely irrelevant. You could put lipstick on a pig and you can call it whatever you want. It's still a pig. The terminology is irrelevant. The concepts that I'm going to explain are what matter. You can call things whatever you want. That was one of the big points because I was having this discussion with this gentleman on his YouTube stream last week, and he kept saying that I did not understand the terminology. The terminology doesn't matter. You can call it whatever you want. It's the fact that you have to understand the concepts. So I'm going to talk about the concepts tonight. And I might throw in a few words to explain the concepts, but the words we use are irrelevant. The terms we use are irrelevant because there are different terms that these companies use on purpose to advertise and somewhat mislead. It's propaganda. It's a way to twist things around, make it sound not so bad. But ultimately, it is what it is. It's lipstick on a pig. Factoring companies are expensive. They are extremely expensive. And to think that they are not is completely wrong thinking. And I will say this, as a 1 to 3, 4, 5 truck carrier, you should be doing everything possible to avoid factoring if you can. Certainly, it all comes down to the numbers. If factoring makes it work for you and you could make more money than any other situation you're in, that's fine. But I am here tonight to help you understand the numbers, understand the costs, because there are people out there that are not explaining it well. Terminology is irrelevant. Factoring is a loan. As we go through this, at some point I have a spreadsheet set up. Everybody uses some type of accounting software, be it QuickBooks or some type of a trucking TMS. Factoring goes on the books as a loan. Now, some people run their books incorrectly. Some people use their accounting system with a lot of shortcuts. And some accounting systems are designed to have these shortcuts, especially some of the trucking software, because factoring is most rampant in the trucking industry. But I am going to show you the longhand version of how the accounting works. And I am going to do it on a spreadsheet live. I'm just going to use an Excel spreadsheet, very raw. It doesn't matter what program you might be using. I'm just going to lay it down step by step on how that works. But factoring is a loan. That's the important concept here. Factoring is a loan. You are borrowing money from someone, and you have to pay it back. It gets misleading because of how it gets paid back, but ultimately, somebody owes you money, and you owe somebody else money, and they are two completely separate transactions. So we're going to get into that tonight. The other one, fees. Again, terminology. Fees, quote unquote, that word, that terminology. But fees are equivalent or equal to, the fees that they advertise are equivalent or equal to 1/12 of an annual percentage rate. When they say it's 2%, 3%, 4%, and we'll get into some examples here shortly, those monthly fees are equivalent to 1 month's worth of interest. Then, of course, I am going to debunk the worst advice ever. I'm not going to tell you what that is because it's absolutely insane. And once you see these numbers, you'll see why I say that. It is absolutely insane to factor for this reason. Absolutely 100%. You lose every time. There is no question about it. Insane. And there is not a factoring rate out there, good or bad, that will make it make sense. The best factoring rate still makes it insane to follow this person's advice. And I'll get into that here shortly too. All right. The term and the concept that we need to understand, forget if we call it fees, forget if we call it interest, whatever you want to call it, that's fine. The concept that you have to understand is the time value of money. The time value of money. Meaning, the greater value of receiving money right now versus receiving that money later. Now, this concept right here, the time value of money, is used by investors. Why does that apply when you are factoring and you're trying to receive money? And again, this is a somewhat reversed way of thinking, which is why I believe a lot of people get confused. The time value of money is why factoring gets expensive. Remember, I touched on it a second ago. The fees that you pay is relative to 1 month's worth of fees. That is 1/12 of the actual annual interest rate. And we're going to break that down further so you can see just how extreme that can be. but the greater value of receiving money now versus later. If I was to offer you $1,000 today or $1,050 tomorrow, you would have to decide how badly you want that $1,000. And ultimately, that's what factoring is. How much do you want today versus how much will you get next month? Investors do this all of the time. There are complex formulas to figure out exactly what the returns on your investment are, depending on what the rates are, depending on what the investments are, the risk involved. Investors, especially when you play the stock market, and that's a little Easter egg for this advice, there is a pretty extensive but very basic and simple concept and formula to figure out, is it worth it to take that 1,000 today or 1,050 tomorrow? And if you think about that, the only factor there is time. The time value of money. What could you do with that $1,000 today that might make it worth more than the $1,050 tomorrow? If you could take that $1,000 today and invest it by either putting it in some type of accounts, a stock, a savings account, some type of a bond, or if you bought something with it, maybe we're in the trucking industry, you buy a truck, you buy a trailer, whatever it is, and you could turn around tomorrow and flip that truck or trailer or your interest in your stock or your bond or whatever you bought, whatever you spent that $1,000 on, if it's worth more tomorrow than $1,050, then the time value of money is in your favor. That's the concept that you have to understand. So, is the present value greater than or less than the future value? What could you do with that money today, right now, to make it worth more than waiting? In some cases, having the money today could benefit you, especially when we're talking about interest on a long-term annual rate. Certainly, there are things you could do that invest today that would return more than putting that money in some type of an account that you can't touch for a year. One of those might be just a standard savings account. If you took the money out of the bank and you bought something with it today that was going to appreciate, maybe land or maybe some type of a business, and that money was worth more in 1 year than it would be today, it would be worth it. Interest rates in the bank are slim to none. And actually, with other things thrown in there like inflation values and so forth, you actually could lose money by leaving money in that type of an account. You could invest it, if you had that cash today, in a better account and get a bigger return on your investment. But that is what you have to figure out. And when you're factoring, you are on the opposite side because ultimately you are the one that is deciding when that money and when that transfer takes place. So let's break it down into an example. So I'm going to use some very basic, easy to understand numbers. That's one of the things that this gentleman with the whiteboard was doing that made it a little bit confusing for people, because he was throwing out on his first example, well, let's say $1,000 and then $10,000. And oh, but if you have a fleet of 100 trucks, it's going to be, $1 million. If it's 20 trucks, it's $300,000. And he would do all these different examples and break it down in different ways. Let me tell you a secret. I don't care if it's $1 or $1 million or $1 billion. The percentages are the same. Could I do more with $1,000? Could I have more opportunity with $1,000 to invest it and get a bigger return than I could with $1? Possibly. And that's certainly a factor that goes into that formula I mentioned. Possibly the amount of money changes the potential future value. But when we're talking about short-term investments, and again, factoring is a loan, It is a 1 month, roughly 30-day investment. Could you do that much more with that little bit more? Let's find out. So, again, we're going to use a single truck because if it's one truck or 100 trucks, the percentage is the same. The percentage on each and every dollar is the exact same. So remember that. We're going to focus on a simple number, $120,000 per year on a single truck. I understand. Trucks should be making more than that. That's not the concept that we're working on here. This is just easy math, easy numbers to work with. A truck might gross double that, but we're going to use $120,000 per year, which is $10,000 per month. Easy math. You could fill in the blanks in these little scenarios with any number that you want. Let's not get too involved in the numbers that we use. This is just for an example. And I don't want to mislead anyone, so we're going to keep it simple. $10,000 per month, $120,000 per year. And this is going to be a perfect world. So it's going to be exactly $10,000 every month and exactly $120,000 at the end of the year. Are we living in a perfect world? No. But for these examples, we are. And then we'll talk about the variables that get thrown into it. For this example, we are going to talk about a 3% factoring fee. The fee, the terminology, the fee. We're going to use the 3% factoring fee. We're going to use a non-recourse factor agreement. Non-recourse. I don't want to make this any more complicated than it needs to be, but to be honest with you, it doesn't matter if it's recourse or non-recourse. The rules apply the same either way. As a matter of fact, I will address it in another video, that the recourse funding versus non-recourse funding is another smoke and mirrors game that a lot of these factoring companies use. That non-recourse stuff is usually not worth the paper that it's written on. The risk is extremely low, and it's like playing the slot machines. It's always, the house always wins. It is in the favor of the factor. That's why they agree to do this stuff. And what do they do when they have this non-recourse funding? Of course, they're going to jack up that rate. That 3% is pretty standard for non-recourse. If you agree to a recourse, a full recourse type funding, you might be able to cut that rate in half in some cases. Certainly lower than 3%. 2.5% is definitely possible without a lot of haggling and negotiation. And that can save you a ton of money. How much are you putting at risk? Very little. And I will address that in another video. I don't want to get too much on a tangent with that. And finally, no reserve for our examples. I'm going to revisit that. No reserve. Again, if you allow the factor to keep money, or to not have to advance you as much money, they may give you a better deal, a better rate. But for our example, no reserve. If they keep a reserve for that horrible advice I'm talking about, it makes it that much worse. I mean, exponentially worse. Like I said, we're going to revisit that part. All right, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of this. I've got a calendar laid out in front of me, January, February through December, the whole year, and we are going to factor that $10,000 per month at $120,000 per year. So January, we take out $10,000. We factored that money. We factor $10,000. February, we factor another $10,000. March, $10,000. April, $10,000. May, $10,000. And so forth all the way through the end of the year. December, $10,000. Our total is that $120,000. And this is where people get confused. So let's slow this down. January, you factor $10,000. What happens next? Remember, this is a perfect world. You're factoring on most brokers with 30-day terms. Some are much less, but 30-day terms. So by 30 days, 1 month, you should have your money. So let's look at this. You factor the money. Let's look at what it looks like on the books. You factored $10,000, and now you have an outstanding loan Don't forget, this is a loan. You have $10,000 outstanding. That broker, your customer, owes somebody some money. Somebody is going to go after that $10,000. They either owe it to you because they are your customer, or they owe it to the factor because you sold the factoring company your invoice. But there is an open loan for $10,000. There's $10,000 outstanding somewhere, whether it goes to you or to the factor. So what happens next? The broker pays that $10,000 outstanding invoice. The broker pays it. So again, let's look at this little chart here. What happens if they pay off that $10,000 outstanding? Boom. It's no longer outstanding. We have factored $10,000 and we now owe zero. There is nothing outstanding. So you know what we should do now? Let's factor another $10,000 in February. So now we have factored, again, we have factored $20,000. Again, we have $10,000 outstanding. The broker paid the first 10, but now we have another 10 outstanding. Let's see what happens next. 30 days, the broker paid. The broker has paid for it, which means zeroes out that outstanding balance. We have factored $20,000 now. $20,000 have been factored. We have nothing outstanding. Let's borrow another 10. $30,000. We have factored $30,000. We're 3 months into the year. We have factored $30,000. We only owe $10,000 right now. March 1st, we owe $10,000. That was the day we submitted that invoice. That was the day that the factor paid it. We owe $10,000. But wait, we've factored $30,000. How is it that we only owe 10? This is a key to this concept right here. The broker just paid that 10. We have zeroed that out. We have factored 30,000, and unless we factor something else, we have factored 30,000 and there is nothing outstanding. We do it again, 40,000, 10 outstanding. Broker pays, it's zero. Are you starting to see the pattern here? Because how much is outstanding at any given time? 50,000, only 10 outstanding. All the way through the end of the year. So now we have factored $120,000 at the end of December. We roll into the next year. We go through the year. We have an outstanding balance. That broker owes somebody some money. They either owe you the money or they owe the factor some money. But at no given time was there an outstanding balance over $10,000. How much did we pay for that $10,000? You never owe more than approximately 1 month's worth of the factoring total revenue amount. Fund your business with 1 month's worth of revenue. Think about that. Does that open up some options for you? Maybe, as I said, these are made up numbers. This is a low amount. Maybe we need $20,000 per month. But if we took that $20,000 on January 1st and we funded our own business for the first $20,000, maybe it's more, maybe it's $30,000. We fund our own business and we put $30,000 of our own money into that. We could go the entire year and not have to borrow any more money, because before that money is due, remember, we take out a personal loan. That's an annual loan. We could borrow that money on an annual basis, fund it ourselves, or if we had the cash ourselves, we could fund it ourselves, right? And then 30 days later, the broker pays that money back, and we can continue to operate on the cash flow at that point. We're going to look at that example here in just a minute. So let's talk about the breakdown of fees. And hopefully I don't lose connection here. The power is flickering for some reason. It's done it a couple times tonight. So look at the breakdown of the fees. You have $120,000 of your annual revenue at a 3% fee. That's a $3,600 annual expense. This is money that you don't get back. You are paying this to somebody else. This isn't not money you invest. This is money that goes out the door and does not come back. But you have only had a $10,000 loan, which has just been revolving month over month over month. You've paid $300 per month. That's the 3% on the $10,000. You've paid $300 per month. $3,600 on that $10,000 revolving loan is a 36% annual rate if you were to equate that to interest. The monthly fees are equal to 1/12 the annual interest rate. 3% fee, forget the terms. It's money that's going out. It's money that is spent. So is interest. If you are paying interest on a loan, it is money that's going out. It is money that is spent. A fee and interest payments go in the exact same column and the exact same category on your books. It's the same thing. Let's look at this if you took out a personal loan at 8%. Now, I have known people to mortgage their house at under 4%. Under 4%. Do I recommend financing your house to fund your business? Not necessarily, but at this kind of savings, you really have to look at all of your options. But let's assume you get a personal loan at only 8%, and maybe you have something at 10 or 12%. But ultimately, if it's under that 36%, you save money. But let's say that we go with an 8% loan. Now, some of the ways that this 8% loan might work is if you have the cash and you are starting your business and you decide, I would rather go out and pay cash for a truck so that I don't have a truck payment. I have $20,000 or $30,000. I am going to pay cash for that truck so I don't have a truck payment. And then I'm going to factor my money. Some of the worst finance agreements for a piece of equipment are maybe 20 to 25%. Those are absolute horrible, and people leave those deals. People leave the bank, drive away in their truck, just shaking their head, cannot believe that they financed a piece of equipment at 20 to 25%. It is absolutely horrible. Some of the, the less than desirable lenders, the lease purchase type rent to own equipment, are oftentimes in this 8% range. If you do the math on it, the equipment is equivalent to this 8 to 10%, sometimes 12%. It's still better than 36%. So how can you get 8% or less than 36% at least? Instead of spending your cash when you start a business, finance that piece of equipment and then fund your own business. You will literally save thousands of dollars. So if you get the 8% loan, and again, if you pull some money out of a mortgage on your house, then you can get it down to 4%. I don't want to get too far off on this, but inflation is upwards of 3%. I mean, that's almost like free money. I've even seen loans 6 months or a year ago that were under 4%. That's like free money in some cases. But when you're borrowing against your own money, inflation works against you because that money is going out the door and you cannot use it to fund yourself. But if you fund yourself with a very low interest loan at $10,000 a month, that 8% annual, and this is where this terminology gets confusing for people, because a factor is talking about a percentage rate of 3%, but that is 1 month. When you go to a bank and you start talking about percentages, that's literally for the entire year. So 8% for 1 month worth, 8% annual for 1 month is less than 1%. It's 0.67% monthly. So you take that $67 monthly cost on $10,000 if you had that $10,000 outstanding in a loan. $800 annual cost instead of the $3,600 cost. A $2,800 per year savings. Now remember, this is on roughly half of what a truck could possibly generate. We're talking about a general dry van could easily gross well over $200,000 in a year, gross revenue. So this number, this savings, is potentially half of what you would save if you were funding this yourself. Over $5,000 per year. Let me let you in on a little secret. People that buy a truck in their first year and start their company in the first year oftentimes have a flat year. And I've even seen it where it's a loss. $5,000 goes a long, long way. That's a huge, huge savings. That could potentially be more than 10% of your annual income. Right there, saved in factoring fees. Just fund it yourself. You guys ready to get to the worst advice ever? This actually blew my mind. Blew my mind. I could not believe this, and he believed it. He was telling this story as if it was true. He says that he does it himself the same way. If he does, I definitely would not want to have anything to do with his business unless I was selling him something because he's willing to pay more than it's worth. You lose money if you factor to invest. So everything I've talked about so far is how do we save money by not factoring? This particular gentleman says that you should factor to get your money sooner so that you can put it in an investment account of some sort to try to pull your money out. Let me ask you this. What can you invest in that's going to get better than a 36% annual return? Now, the example that he used was the stock market. Actually said that people that invest a lot of money, millions of dollars, they strive to get 10% monthly returns. And he said that he was able to get 2 to 3% monthly returns, which is absolutely without question false. He obviously has no idea how to run his own books. That's nearly impossible. If there were 10% returns in the stock market would more than double every year. Never has happened ever in the history of the stock market. Let me show you this little graph right here. So the top section right there, and I know a lot of you watch this on your small devices on your phones. The top section is the year over year. And notice there's a lot of sections there that are below the line in the red. That means those years were actually a loss. You could take money and invest in the stock market, and overall, you lose money in those years. But if you look on the right, it shows the averages. On average, year over year, we're seeing 8.4% increase. This goes all the way up to 2017, but goes all the way back to 1872. We've got a couple of 100 years worth of data here, guys. We've got plenty of data to look at. Average return on investment, 8.4% year over year. If you look at 5-year turnaround, so if you're buying 5-year notes, your average has been in 5-year increments roughly 7.1%. 10 years on average, 6.8%. And on a 20-year investment, 6.7%. So your best deal is to go up there and try to invest and be aggressive year over year and really play it risky. You're going to get an 8.4% return. I don't see 10% in 1 month. That just doesn't seem like it's going to happen. So I'll give you a little bit more on that. Some of the most aggressive investors invest in extremely high risk investments. See upwards of 15%, nearly double the average, upwards of 15% in 1 year. Those are extremely aggressive investors. On the other side of that are mutual funds, which typically are, in layman's terms, it's basically a whole bunch of stocks to avoid the risk. A group of investors get together, pool their money, and buy a lot of different stocks to minimize their risk. Whenever you minimize the risk, you also minimize your returns. Mutual fund returns are somewhere between 2 to 5%. typically in the average range of about 3%. And that was the type of funds that this gentleman was saying that you should invest in. Completely inaccurate and blatantly outright wrong. Stocks average return, let's say we go on the high side of the average. And let's say that we're getting a full 10% return. Your monthly return on 10% is about 0.83%, still less than 1% per month. Remember, we are spending 3% per month to get your money earlier. But wait a minute, what are we forgetting in that calculation? You're going to factor $10,000 in a month, right? But this is money going out of your pocket. So the factor is not giving you $10,000 to invest. The factor is giving you $9,700 to invest. You don't even get to invest the whole $10,000. They take the 3% off the top. Remember when I first started, I said this scenario says that there's no reserve involved. If your factoring company holds a reserve, and typically the reserve is around 10%, usually between 5 and 10, but oftentimes 10%, that means on your $10,000 factor, you will only get $9,000 back. But we're in the perfect world here, and so there's no reserve whatsoever. You are going to get $9,700, but you got it early. Remember, present value versus future value. You've got your money earlier. What can you do with it? Let's invest it in the stocks. You invest that $9,700 at less than 0.83% for the month. You have made some money. You have made $80.51. So at the end of the month, you have $9,780.51. Does that sound right to you? Does that sound like a good investment to you? Why would you trade $300? You are paying somebody $300 for them in exchange to give you $80. Why would you do that? Does that make sense? This was the advice that I thought was insane. I was beating my head against the wall. Absolutely insane advice. Let me reboot this here, get this back to where I want to be. I apologize for that. Okay, so I want to take you into a spreadsheet so you can see the accounting methods behind this. And then as soon as I do this, and this is completely off the cuff, I do not have any numbers in front of me. I'm just going to go off of the way it should work. So let me see if I can pull up a spreadsheet. Here we go. All right. So this is how accounting works for factoring. And a lot of people do this wrong. So this is the spreadsheet right here. You've got your debits and credits, and I'm going to work both sides of it here. So the very first thing you do, you have hauled a load, you deliver the load, and you are going to send an invoice to your customer. Invoice to customer. This is an accounts receivable, and it was $10,000 asset. We use two-line accounting, so that means you had sales revenue to balance that at $10,000. Remember, if you've heard the term balance sheet, this is where that comes from. You have a debit of $10,000 to accounts receivable and then $10,000 to sales revenue. That balances. Obviously, you sent an invoice to your customer. Now, here's where people get screwed up. They say, well, I sent the invoice to the factoring company, and that's the only transaction that I need to track, which is incorrect. It is a workaround. It usually works, but it is incorrect. The correct way to do it would be to send an invoice, create an invoice in your system for the customer. Whether you actually send it to them or not is irrelevant. But the customer owes you the money. They do not owe the factoring company the money. How do you know that? If there is a claim, who are they going to sue? Who are they going to come after? Do you think they're going to go after the factoring company? Absolutely not. They're coming after you. They worked for you, or you worked for them, rather, and they are coming after you for the claims. This transaction is between you and your customer. The factoring company has nothing to do with what the customer owes you. The factoring company is going to set up a separate agreement. They are going to loan you that. They're going to take their 3%, so they give you the 97%, and so that you get bank cash of $9,700. But remember, this has to balance. What is that $9,700 balance against? It's a loan from the factor. And again, this is a completely raw spreadsheet. The factor has a loan against you for $10,000. Remember I said the non-recourse stuff really doesn't matter? You owe that factor $10,000. They are going to get their pound of flesh some way. And look closely at your non-recourse agreements. Most of the time, unless that broker files bankruptcy, and it has to be within a certain period of time, and it has to follow an entire list of rules, has to fit in the template, unless all of those things happen, that even the non-recourse agreement can come back on you, and you owe the factor $10,000, they still get their $300. So their factor fee. It's an expense of $300. So right there, that's all balanced. We have $10,000 on both sides of the line here. So this is the first of the month. Those transactions all happen on the first of the month as soon as you factor your money. So currently, you have a loan out for $10,000 that you are responsible to pay. If you go to buy property or you go to buy a big business investment, they will look at this. Especially if you have a big fleet. So with one truck, you might have upwards of $20,000 or $30,000 on loan. If you go to buy a house or you go to buy a piece of property, that is a big chunk of money, and the banks want to know where it's accounted for, and they are going to view that as a loan until it is paid back in full. You still owe that factoring company that $10,000. If you have a fleet of 20 trucks, 100 trucks, you might have $500,000, $1 million right here on loan from your factoring company. And you cannot tell me that the banks are going to overlook that before they lend you any more money. Is it a secured loan? Yes, it's secured against your receivables. You sold them the receivables, but if that receivable does not pay out, that factor is going to hold you responsible. There might be some workarounds in that non-recourse agreement, but your bank, your lenders, are going to have a hard time believing that. That loan is outstanding. I'll tell you something else. I talk a lot about contracts in my other videos, my previous videos. Oftentimes, if one particular customer does not pay, especially if it's over a claim or something of the sort, it's not unheard of for a factor to hold all of the outstanding money. So let's say you had 3, 4, 5 trucks and you had $100,000 or $200,000 outstanding on loan from the factor, and then you have so much as a 50-cent claim from a big broker. And that big broker says, you know what, something was notated on the bill of lading, and because we have a right of offset in our contract, we will not pay you that whatever, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, $100,000 that we owe you, and combined with that and all of the other brokers that you've worked with that $200,000, $300,000 outstanding that's on loan, the factor will not release that money, and you could be responsible even though it's only one of many brokers. There are so many scenarios where the factor may come back for you. And I will tell you this, that particular broker that this gentleman at the truck show was representing has been known to go after everything, upwards of including the owner's house, the owner's personal assets. I happen to know that that factor has repossessed and foreclosed on a trucking company owner's home to collect on this loan. And it was a non-recourse deal. So now, this is the beginning of the month. You have all that stuff hanging over your head. The broker has not paid yet. You have to zero this out. You have to zero out your accounts receivable. You have to zero out that loan. How do you do it? So the customer now is going to pay, and it's going to go to, typically you do it this way, undeposited funds, and then basically it's a $10,000 asset. And then you basically just break this up over what you owe the factor. Let's see. I think I did this backwards. So basically that zeroes out the loan to the factoring company. But all of these entries, and actually I think I'm missing a step here. You also have to, okay, if you had a reserve account that I mentioned, you'd also have to zero out that reserve account. You have to have a running tally of all of the above. So it's important to understand this entire process, not just the transaction between you and the factor. All right, let me head back to the main camera here. And let me also, all right. Now I can see the, let me transfer this. Now I can see your comments, okay. Most direct shippers will give you 10 days at 2%, which 10 days at 2% would be fine. But again, how long do they pay? How long does it take them to pay if you don't take that advance, that quick pay? It's very common to do 2% 10 net 30. That's very common. And that's Pete. So I actually, and Pete's a broker. So I actually have most of my customers will pay, some even pay COD, and several of them will pay within about 2 weeks at 0%. They don't charge anything. So Columbia Glider Dave says, sounds like a twisted loss aversion. Cash and ham seems more valuable than money you have to wait on. So Columbia Glider Dave, $3,600 for a $10,000 loan. Yeah, and so I think I'm reading that backwards. Correct. People think that it's better to have the money now than to wait on it. But waiting 30 days doesn't make any sense to spend that kind of cash on it. This is a green screen whiteboard, exactly. Okay, here's something, and I didn't want to get too far off on this. Good arguments, but ignore some key facts about risk management. Factoring companies. I touched on the non-recourse. I have had, we were up at 22 trucks. I typically carry a balance on my receivables, between $300,000 and $400,000. Last year, obviously, when rates were a lot better, my receivables was typically upwards of $400,000. I've been doing this as a carrier since 2012 with all of those invoices, and I have tens of thousands of invoices that I've sent out over the years. I have had two that have come back on me. Two. Now, in neither case would a non-recourse or a factoring company have protected me, because one of them was a bankruptcy where the trustee for the bankruptcy court demanded, after they had paid me, they actually did pay the invoice, they wanted their money back. So that was one. The other one was about $700 and something. So again, why would I pay, when I'm carrying $400 some thousand on receivables, why would I pay $30,000, $30,000, $40,000, whatever it ends up being, just to avoid the $700 loss? So risk aversion kind of works the other way in this scenario. The risk is losing that much money on your investment. He's explaining the difference between monthly interest and annual interests. He started by saying the guy couldn't be more wrong. And let me tell you who I'm talking about. The YouTube channel is Big Rig Radio, and it's Jeffrey Like. So those of you that are on here, or if he happens to be on here, tag him in this, share this to him. He said he wanted to see it. Absolutely, his information was absolutely incorrect, wrong, flat wrong. I did not get into, so Trucker's Coach says, let me ask this, did they get into it at Matt's? No, I mentioned that. I saw him at Matt's. He was in a booth doing the professional representative thing, and I was not going to go in there. Those factoring companies spend a lot of money, and I was not going to get in there and get in the middle of that, although it was absolutely incorrect and wrong. Reserves are horrible. And as I mentioned, the reserves, I was doing the perfect scenario. Let me elaborate a little bit more on this. Most factors hold back a reserve, around 10%. I've seen some less. Typically, they're going to hold back a reserve. I happen to know that the factor that particular gentleman represents holds about 10% for their standard contract. I mentioned that, and he said that it's negotiable, but most people agree to that. So again, you're factoring your money at the 3%, and you're getting only 90% back before the 30 days. You get the rest back then. So you have to still wait 30 days to get the other 7% of your money. But that's 7% of your money that you don't get to spend. You don't get to invest. You don't get to do whatever you plan on doing with it. So that holdback, that reserve, is another dip into this out of your pocket. How was it? Jeremy Lee James says, how was it wrong? And I am, those of you guys are talking about the company, and because I kind of slammed it and dug into it, I am not going to mention the company name, but you guys can tear them up if you want to. How is it wrong? It is absolutely wrong to advise people to borrow money at a 36% interest rate to reinvest it at a 3% interest rate. That's wrong. That's absolutely, and he kept saying, he did this in his YouTube video, and he's going through these numbers. He says, the math doesn't lie. And I'm looking at this board saying, it absolutely does not lie. You're correct, but you don't understand it. The math doesn't lie, but you don't get it. You don't understand what the heck you're talking about. It absolutely, no, it doesn't lie. You're right. It does not lie, but you have no idea what you're talking about. Let's see. Okay. So YouTube has changed their format since I last did a live stream like this, and from what I see on the corner of the screen here, a lot. I don't know if it's on my end. Messages retracted. I only see a handful of messages here, but I see that it goes way up the screen. Okay. Jeremy Lee James, you must not have watched my video, but let me go back. Let me briefly recap this, and I would suggest that you go back and watch it. 3% monthly interest is equivalent to 36% annual interest. Is it the same? Is it the same word? No. Is it the same terminology? No. Go back and watch the video from the beginning. The terminology doesn't matter. I broke it down with how a loan works and how factoring works. 3% interest on a 30-day receivable. It's your money, and you are taking a loan. I even showed how it's done in the accounting on your books, in your accounting system, be it QuickBooks or whatever you're using. It goes on the books as a loan for roughly 30 days, which means you're borrowing money and you are paying 3% to have that money 30 days sooner, which is equivalent to a 36% annual fee or interest or whatever term you want to use. All right, so Columbia Glider Dave says, how much cash reserve or business credit would you recommend having access to? Just cash flow, the receivables per truck. Okay, so, the other thing that's interesting is, and I'll bring this story up, the guy that runs the Rate Per Mile Masters Facebook group, Chad Boblet, he had zero money when he got started. He started his trucking company with credit cards. And that seems really, really risky. It's still, even with credit cards, less expensive than factoring. So how much cash reserve or business credit? The average truck right now, we're just talking about funding your operations, the average truck right now should be turning roughly, I like to shoot for $5,000 a week, so roughly $20,000 a month. You don't have to factor every single invoice. There's places like Convoy and Uber and JB Hunt that will pay you with no fees up front. Mercer, no fees. So there are several that will factor a lot. There's a lot of brokers out there that'll factor at I say factor, quick pay. And it's not even quick pay because they don't pay you a fee. It's just you're not extending them credit. They're paying you pretty much as soon as you deliver the load, within a day or two, with no fees up front. So because there are those out there, and if you're still shooting for between $5,000 a week, you're going to be in the neighborhood of $20,000 a month. And Jeremy James, I'm going to come back to that really quick. And again, you need to go back and watch the video from the front. If you sell $10,000 worth of bills, you will pay $300 at 3%. And then when you do $10,000 the next time, it's going to be 300 more and 300 more and 300 more. It's equivalent to 36% on an annual basis. If you waited for that money for 30 days, you would have that $300 in your pocket. If you did that month over month over month, you'd have $3,600. And the only amount you've ever had outstanding is $10,000. $10,000, $10,000, $10,000. You've never borrowed more than $10,000, $300 at a time. So at the end of the year, you've had a revolving $10,000 loan. You've paid $3,600. If you go back and watch the video, I did the example. You could borrow $10,000 from the bank in the very beginning, or if you had $10,000 cash, you could fund your own business with that very same $10,000. Just wait 30 days. You only need $10,000, which proves that you're never borrowing more than $10,000. It's $10,000 on 30-day loans, over and over and over. $10,000, $300 fee to get your money 30 days faster. That's equivalent, the time value of money equivalency of a 36% advance on a full year interest rate or fee. You call it a fee. 36% fee on that $10,000 loan at the end of the year. Over the course of the year, if you're factoring at 3%, it equals out to 36% on 120. Never more than 10,000 outstanding in my example. Correct. And going back to what we were talking about. So typically most drivers, most trucks, dry van operations are going to be in the neighborhood of 5,000 a week. Even if you're up 6 or 7, you're probably not going to factor every single receivable. Even if you do need to fund every single receivable for a 30-day period, you're probably going to be under 30,000 anyhow. So if you have $30,000 liquid cash, you should be okay. That should be plenty to fund your business and not have to factor. That's basically what I said about buying a truck. If you have the cash, it might be more beneficial to finance a truck, a $30,000 or $40,000 truck, finance it at a much lower interest rate, 10, 12, 15% maybe. It's still less than half the cost of factoring that same amount of money. So it might make more sense. You really need to sit down and run the numbers on all of your financials before you do this. So let me tell you another part of this story that I didn't touch on yet. And that is tiered fees. This particular company that this particular gentleman is talking about does 3%. 3%. on 30 days. Of my roughly $1,000 monthly receivables, which is thousands of brokers, my average days to pay is 36. 36 days. Which means they probably mail the check on the 30th day. That's great. They pay on time. 30 days, it's in the mail. But the factoring company is not going to get it till the 36th day. By their agreement, if they don't have it on the 30th day, they bump that fee up to 4%. And they know it. This is another sales tactic scheme that they are using. They absolutely know that most of the customers are going to send it beyond that 30-day period. They know, by and large, they're going to get to charge you 4%, not just 3%. 4%, which is a 48% annual rate. That $10,000 loan, at the end of the year, you've paid $4,800 for that same $10,000 loan over and over and over. That's 48%. And they will get it on the majority of your invoices. And they're very keen on making sure that the minute you enter that invoice into their system, it starts that clock ticking. And they don't stop it until they actually get the check in the mail. It's in hand. Patriot Star, good advice. A secured loan with a truck as collateral will usually be lower interest rate than an unsecured loan. Elizabeth, exactly. Those people at Patriot Star are really smart. I would listen to them. All right, so there are other fees involved that I didn't even get into. So when they process an invoice, typically they're going to charge you $1 or $2 for every single invoice. Even if it's an invoice for $0, the customer just needs their paperwork processed. They're going to charge you $1 or $2. Every factor charges something. Then they're going to charge you to put the money into your account. So let's say that they buy that $10,000 invoice. They'll pay you $1. They'll take $1. You got to pay them $1 to process it. Then they take the fee off the total amount. Remember, it's a $10,000 invoice, so they're still going to get their 3 or 4% on the entire $10,000 loan that they're giving you. That dollar is in addition to that. So they're going to take $1 for the processing. And then they have to take that money and they put it on an EFS card or a Comdata card, or they deposit it into your bank. Then they're going to charge you $5 for that. And if they put it on a Comdata card, then they're going to charge you $1.50 or $3 to transfer it or use it. And then they're going to charge you another $4 or $5 to transfer it into your bank account later. Then they're going to charge you another $1.50 or $2 or $3 to write an EFS check or a Com check off of that money. They are going to milk you every single way possible. So Columbia Glider Day says the key to this is the factor is never loaning out more than roughly 30 days of receivables. Exactly. Roughly. And granted, it's not exactly 30 days. I said that was in a perfect world. There may be times when it goes 36 days. Most of them, that's my average. I have some that pay in 21 or 28 days. Some of them, they pay before 30 days. It's rare. It's very rare. There's only a couple that do. Some of them will be upwards of 40, 45 days. And certainly if we look in my aging report, I have some that we might have to chase down. Even though some of this stuff is factored, you might still have to chase your own money. You might still have to do it yourself. And the other aspect of this is people say that, well, I will just send it all to one place and it makes it faster and I don't have to spend the time doing the invoicing. I don't have to spend the time working out all this information. By and large, it takes just as long to gather all the paperwork, the PODs, the bill of lading, and so forth, and scan it all together and send it to the factoring company as it would be to do the exact same thing and send it to your customer. It really doesn't take any longer. You still need to, if you're smart about it, you still should be tracking your days to pay. You still should be tracking when your customers pay you and if there's anything outstanding, even if you're on non-recourse, because you should be holding your customers accountable. Your factoring company won't. If you call any factoring company, including the non-recourse factors, they're going to tell you that they do soft collections. meaning that they might make a call at 45 or 60 days to see where your money's at. And the reason they say they do that is so that they don't upset your customer for you. Because if you did work for a customer, if you can imagine if you were the customer and all of a sudden you have a factoring company on day 30 calling, threatening to file on your bond and threaten to sue you and threaten all this stuff, you'd probably be hesitant to work with that particular carrier again. So the factors say that that's their reasoning behind their soft collections. I'll tell you their real reasoning. It's too damn hard. They don't want to do that either. They're not going to do it for you. And this is why trucking companies should not invoice until all accessorials are on a rate con. Also correct, also a problem. Let me go up a couple. The key to this is the factor is never loaning out more than roughly 30 days of receivables. Many truck drivers think freight brokers are ripping them off, but will gladly, eagerly sign up with a factoring company. Also true. The best investment out there right now, the best investment, if I win the lottery and I have millions of dollars, I am opening a factoring company because I could nearly double my money in a year running a factoring company. I would focus on the high risk ones. I would market to everybody, and at 4% or 5%, I could get, if I had $1 million I put into it, I could definitely have 1.5 million by the end of the year, maybe more, out of a factoring company. Jeffrey Like is the one that said that he was going to invest in the stock market. The best investment is into factoring companies. Factoring companies make tons of money. And then he also mentioned that because he is a super special guy and he's super special with his super special rates of 1%, that's why it makes sense for him to factor and still invest. As I mentioned, we're at 8% annual interest. Even at 10%, we're at less than 1% annual interest in the stock market, and that's risky stocks. So you still lose money doing that. Not to mention the dollar that you have to pay up front. They're taking the factoring fee off the top, so you don't get to invest the whole thing. The money transfer fees, all the other stuff. It's crazy expensive. And it's absolutely foolish and asinine to factor, especially at those high rates, especially if it's only a 1 or 2 truck company, because the paperwork's not that hard. That's the biggest thing that people say as well. It's the paperwork's easier. Or they say they provide credit checks. You can get credit checks the same level of detail from the load boards, as long as it's got that little check mark. The credit checking companies, the factoring companies use the same credit check. TransCredit, you could go get your own TransCredit account. It would be cheaper. You could pull credit reports off Experian. It would be cheaper. Or you can just rely on the load board data, which is pretty much pulled from the factoring companies anyway. Factoring companies typically use all these credit checks and then just look at their own books and say, well, this company hasn't paid us in 38 days and they have this much outstanding, so that's their average. They create their own numbers. It's not even a good number to go off of. It depends on how many customers they have in their database. Any more questions specific to this topic, and then I'll wrap things up because I didn't want to go this long with this video. All right. Well, I will wrap things up then with an announcement. Number 1, we are rebranding. The Trucking with Authority show will continue on Tuesday nights. It is going to be on the You Drive You network. We've changed the name of the channel to You Drive You. I'm still going to do that particular show, but I'm going to be adding more content, more learning, more coaching, all on the You Drive You network. I'm also going to be doing some free trainings in person free trainings. It looks like I had originally planned on doing one the 3rd week of April coming up, but that happens to be Easter weekend. Friday would have been Good Friday, so Elizabeth advised that we push that one off. So now I'm looking at mid-May, the 2nd or 3rd week of May. I will have information on that, and it will be at our brand new office in Tennessee, in Cleveland, Tennessee, just about 20 miles north of Chattanooga. So we will be doing free in-person live trainings. Elizabeth says I need to back it down, but I am going to do a full week, Monday through Friday, especially for this first one. The first one is going to be packed full of information. I'm going to throw stuff in there that I charge a ton of money for. I might have to whittle this down in future classes, but this first one, I'm going to put every bit of information I can. So we're going to talk about getting started, getting your mindset right to get started, structuring your business, building a business plan. We're going to look at all the load boards. We're going to look at dispatching options. We're going to look at how to run a brokerage, sales tactics, how to build a carrier, how to add a fleet. If you're buying a truck, what you should be looking for. Leasing to a carrier, what you should be looking for. If you are a carrier and you want to add owner-operators, or if you want to add company drivers, what you need to do. Cost per mile, cost per day. Negotiation is going to be a huge one. That'll probably be a good portion of a full day. Wow. I mean, there'll be tons of stuff, full week long, and I may even have people making phone calls, dispatching some trucks. So you'll be, if you're brand new, you'll be talking to brokers, you'll be looking at load boards, you'll be seeing all this information. I will be doing that the second or third week of May. May is packed full. There's a conference in Atlanta I'm supposed to go to. There's a conference in Phoenix, Arizona I'm supposed to go to. I'm putting on this conference. I've got new drivers starting. May is going to be the busiest month for me, but I have already committed to doing this class. I'm going to make sure that we get it done. It'll be our grand opening, christening for the new office in Cleveland, Tennessee. I'm in Florida now. I will be here for the next couple of weeks. Then I'm headed to Tennessee for looks like the most of the month of May. So stay tuned, and I will have information on exactly who, what, when, and where. And Chris will be there. Truck Driver Survival will be there. So I've already got one, so that'll be great. So if any of you would like information on that, you can find me on Facebook is the best place to contact me, and I will have more details. And I'm actually here in the office updating the website. Well, I'll have sign-up details and so forth going forward. I'll probably put an official announcement specific to that out tomorrow. So with that, everyone, thank you very much. And if you have any more questions about factoring, and please, somebody forward this to Jeffrey, because I need to tell him how wrong he actually is on this. And with that being said, everybody have a good night.